Welcome to another episode of The Agile Speaker, where I am talking to Maryanne Johnston about the science behind the art of speaking. This is the final episode of our 5-part series, and we're finishing the way a lot of good presentations do, with the dreaded Q&A. Whether it's a staff meeting, an investor pitch, or an hour-long keynote, we often have to finish a talk by fielding questions from the audience. It's the most nerve-wracking part for many of us, probably because it's the section that feels the most outside of our control. So I started by asking Maryanne, is there much we can do here to fight that fear?
Absolutely. There's a lot that you can do to feel like you can take it back within your own control. I see Q&A as being an opportunity, not just a reaction to a presentation or a pitch. It's a chance to be able to put across more of your message and more of your credibility through that part. So it's really important to plan. But I think that often people focus so much on the pitch that they just think they'll just wing it on the Q&A. And either they say, well, that bit's okay because I know my stuff. But that can actually be quite a dangerous line of thinking, because even though you do know all your stuff, that might lead to you over-answering or turning off onto irrelevant parts of the question and all sorts of... There's a lot of booby traps in the Q&A. But so it is important to plan, but when I say plan, I don't mean planning necessarily the questions you're going to get asked. I mean that you can plan the questions you want to be asked. So you can look at this from a different perspective of thinking about some quite cunning tactics in how you build up your pitch and thinking, if I tell them what I'm not going to quite tell them, if I just mention something, then they'll probably ask me about it. So it's teasing the questions you want. So for an investor pitch, it may be that you mention something about competition, and then it's highly likely that your panel will ask you for more detail on that.
And that's not come across as unprepared by not giving all the detail. That's okay to do it that way.
Well, yes, because ultimately, if you have, for example, a 3-minute pitch followed by 7 minutes of Q&A, it's a 10-minute pitch. You can't possibly expect to fit in everything within that 3 minutes. But by mentioning certain things, but not going into the detail, then it's likely you prompt that question.
How do you go about that then? How do you perform the Jedi mind trick of making somebody ask the question you want them to?
Well, it is literally through teasing, through mentioning it, but not going into the detail. Yeah. But a couple of years ago, I worked with a client, a really super guy called Callum Murray from Amicus, and he was pitching at EIE 17. So he was doing an extended pitch, 6-minute pitch with 4 minutes of Q&A from a panel in front of, I think, 700 people that year. And we worked really carefully on crafting his pitch so that it absolutely stimulated certain questions that he wanted more airtime on in the Q&A. And for example, he mentioned what their product was, but he did not go into detail. He didn't show a demo. He mentioned the competition in literally one sentence, but he did not go into detail. I have a whole ream of questions that I have anyway that I fire at my clients when I do Q&A practice, because my aim is to make sure they are being agile in how they handle it, because you cannot possibly plan exactly the question you're going to get. But at least if you can go around certain areas and get them practiced in getting the message across and giving it an example, then that's great. Yeah. But on the day, in front of those 700 people, each question that he got in the Q&A were 4 questions that we'd hoped he would get. Yeah. And I remember the twinkle in his eye as those questions came up, and it was really like Q&A perfection, watching him take the questions, answer them, and then send them back to get another question. Yeah. It was super, and he won Pitch of the Day that year as well.
This made me wonder about credibility. When I'm watching a speaker, I sometimes find if they're too good or too polished, it actually puts me off just a little. I think it happens when people are word perfect, like they're reading from a script in their head, and you can tell they've rehearsed it a lot. It's the slickness of that approach. It just pings my salesman radar and switches me off. But then you see a really great speaker, someone who really knows their stuff, but they can still talk about it in a much more conversational way. They're in control, but they're not saying exactly what they said last time they did this talk. They're adding personality and talking like a real person. It's that approach, not the heavily scripted one, that really attracts me, and for me, gives someone real credibility. So, it made me wonder, is that one of the big opportunities with Q&A? Is Q&A the time to be more flexible, to rehearse those answers, but more broadly, so you sound knowledgeable, but in a more conversational way?
That's a good tactic to use if that works for the content, because, of course, with all those short pitch situations, you are so constrained by the amount of time that you have. And I think it's great to be able to bring something into the Q&A. It might be a new example. It might be a new, some new information that you haven't been able to fit in, something about your team or something. And that can have a great effect on the audience.
Yeah. So do you think there's a best practice way of formulating answers in a pitch? How do you make sure you put them across in the best way?
Listen, think, speak, shut up. Quite simply, it's as simple as that. But it really is about listening carefully to what you're being asked, thinking before you speak, so that it comes across that you are considering the best way to answer the question. When you do speak, it's about being message driven, answering the question rather than going off on a tangent and going around the houses. So answering the question and maybe giving a quick example if it's relevant and if you have time, and then shutting up. I really see Q&A a bit like a game of ping pong, and I think you need to keep the ball moving. And the thing is that if you grab onto the ball and you run with it, there's a good chance that you go way off on a different line of thinking. And that can be frustrating, particularly if it's a panel situation and there is a time constraint on the Q&A.
So I'm getting from that, it's a lot about not wasting time on the detail during the pitch, making sure that comes in the Q&A, but being as brief as possible, as concise as possible at the time.
That's right. If somebody asks you the time, you don't tell them how the watch is made.
And that, for me, is a huge part of Maryanne's message, from planning right through to Q&A. Know your audience, find out exactly what they need, and give it to them directly, concisely, and in a way that only you can. I hope you enjoyed the series and learned a few things to take back to the boardroom and onto the stage. Let us know what you'd like to hear next, though. Tweet any questions, requests, or topic suggestions to Maryanne_MJ on Twitter. And in the meantime, if you want to go deeper on the topic, you can check out Maryanne's work over at maryannejohnston.co.uk. For now, though, that's all from the Agile Speaker Season 1. Thanks for listening.